We all know RESTful web services are all the rage, but there's still a place in modern architectures for SOAP-based web services. And if you're building modern architectures in Java, well, you're probably using Spring Boot, which is why I've put this tutorial together. I want to show you just how easy it is to build SOAP-based web services in Spring Boot. It might be just as easy as creating RESTful ones. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at the serverside.com. I'm also the author of Hibernate Made Easy. I got a new edition coming out, and I'm raffling off copies to people who sign up for my newsletter. So make sure you check out the link in the description. And I just want to show you how easy it is to get started and keep going with SOAP-based web services in Spring Boot, starting off with the creation of a Spring Boot project, which is exactly what we're going to do next. It's probably no surprise to find out that in order to do Spring Boot-based SOAP web services, you're going to have to start and create a new Spring Boot project in Eclipse or whatever IDE you're using. Can be IntelliJ, could be VS Code. I'm going to create a Maven project here. I'm going to call it Spring with SOAP. Gonna change the gav a little bit. com.mcnz.spring.soap 1.0 is the version. Well, that's fairly bold. That's all standard stuff there, nothing too exciting. I will click the next button, and here I'm going to add in a couple of important things. The first thing I'm going to add in is Spring Boot DevTools. I just like to have that in there, so my project will stop and start. And then I also need Spring Web. Let me see if I can find it. Spring Web, and specifically Spring Web Services. That's going to give me the support that I need in order to create SOAP-based web services with Spring Boot. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's a couple of changes that we're going to have to add to that POM file. We'll do those in just a minute because there's another configuration change that we have to make right away. And it has to do with the way that Spring Boot does SOAP-based microservices. In order to do SOAP-based microservices in Spring Boot, you have to take a top-down approach. That is, you start with your XSD files, which describes the methods that you want to invoke and the properties that you want to pass across the network, the data you want to pass across the network. And then Spring Boot creates some Java beans for you, and then you have to add in a few endpoints that implement some logic when somebody makes a request to your web service. So that means we have to start off by throwing into our resources folder here a new file, a new XSD file. I'm going to call mine score.xsd. And I've got some data to feed in there already. This is my score.xsd file. Click Control S to save that. Double click on it to bring it full screen. Now, you certainly don't need to be an expert on writing this. I certainly am not. But the idea here is I'm going to be creating a web service that's going to support my online rock, paper, scissors game. And for every user that comes into the site, we're going to keep the score for them, the number of wins, losses, and ties. So eventually someone will request a user score. And you can see here I've got an endpoint that says get score request. When somebody requests a score, they'll give me the name of a user, and then giving that name of the user, I'll look up that user in my database and find out what their score is. Now, I'm not going to be doing Spring JDBC right here. I got a bunch of other tutorials on that. I'm just going to mock out, stub out some data for that. But that's the idea there. And then, of course, then a response will come back when somebody asks to get the score. You can see the definition of the response there. The response returns a score. And what is a score? Well, score is a combination of the name. It should be user there, right? The user is a string. Then we also have the wins, losses, and ties. So the score is what comes back when somebody asks for the score. That is where we start now. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to have Spring and some nifty little plugins create Java beans for us, and eventually a WSDL file. Now that means going into our POM file and making a couple of changes. I have to first add in a new dependency, the WSDL for J dependency. So I'm going to go in here, double click to make this big screen, all of that great stuff in there for supporting Spring Boot. I'm going to paste that in, Control Shift F, Control S, and now it all looks very, very handsome in there. So WSDL for J is one thing that I need. And then the other thing that I need is I need a build plugin. And this build plugin, it's a Mojo plugin, not the Mojo programming language plugin, which you really need to learn. But it's a JAX-B for Maven plugin that will generate new files for us based on the XSD file. It'll create new classes, new components for us based on the contents of that XSD file. So let me see if I did my paste in correctly there. I need to paste in this plugin, Control Shift F to format everything. And let's take a look at the data that we've got here. We've got a plugin. This plugin is from Codehouse, Mojo plugin, JAX B2 Maven plugin, version 3.2. That's the latest. Looks like it's got an execution point, XJC, and this XJC execution point is going to look for a file named score.xsd in my resources folder. And when it finds that score.xsd file, it's going to take a look through it and create a bunch of Java beans based on what it sees. And the Java beans that it sees, well, it's going to take a look at the namespace that's defined in that XSD file and throw all of the Java beans that it creates into a folder in src main Java, and then looking at the namespace of the application. You know what, I might as well look at the namespace right now. We're going to see this a few times. For me, the namespace is soap.j2ee.mcnz.com. Okay, are we done with the XML? I actually wrote a book called Hibernate Made Easy, and it was just about how to do Hibernate without XML. Like, the whole idea was for people that don't like XML, and that was me. Okay, so I'm going to come over to my main code here. As I mentioned, the XSD file has the namespace soap.j2ee.mcnz.com. And look, you'll see a folder called com.mcnz.je.soap over here. And in that folder there, look at that. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different files in it. Get score request, get score response, object factory, score, all of which maps to the various components defined in here, right? Get score request. The score object is the data that comes back. The score has a user, number of wins, number of losses, and number of ties. And if I look in this file here, you can see, boom, it has the username, the number of wins, the number of losses, and the number of ties. Okay. We're cooking with gas here, okay? We're moving quickly. We've got everything set up to do this top-down configuration. Now it's time to start doing some coding. Now, somebody's going to make a request into our application, and specifically they're going to have a SOAP-based request. That SOAP-based request is going to ask to get the score, a get score request. It's going to pass in the name of the user that they're interested in, and then we need to return a score object. And you can see that in the score response. Now, it's our job to take that and move all of that into some Java code, some Spring code. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a brand new class. I'm going to call it the score endpoint. It's not going to inherit from anything. It's not going to have a main method, but what it will have is we'll have a method that's public. It'll return the score response, specifically the get score response. You can see that's one of the objects that was created for us to hold all of the data for the response. I'm just going to call it get score. I think that's a good name for it. And what is going to come into this method? Well, we're going to get a big payload from the SOAP, Spring Boot SOAP infrastructure. There's going to be a request payload. And what's going to come in? Well, we're going to send out the get score response. We're going to bring in the get score request. And that get score request is actually going to have the name of the user that we're interested in. So we could always say something like, I don't know, hey, if the request user equals ignore case, and we'll look for scrumptious, maybe scrumptious, Darcy DeClute is playing this game, who knows? Oh, that autocomplete just drives me mad. And let's see, if scrumptious comes in and we want to get the score that scrumptious has as she's playing this game, well, I mean, theoretically it would look this all up in a database, but instead what I'm just going to do is I'm going to create a new score object here. And down here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to score.setWins and set the wins to 100 for scrumptious. And then we'll just say if anybody else comes in, we're just going to do score.setWins to 99, little tip of the hat to Wayne Gretzky there, where we'll set the losses to Mario Lemieux, the greatest hockey player of all time. And then we'll set ties to number 7. That's Tim Horton's number. He's the greatest defenseman to ever play for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Tied in with a Bill Barilko story. Should look that up. But the idea here is someone's going to ask for the score. I want to send some interesting data back. They're going to give me a username. I don't want to do JDBC here, but you get the idea. If it's scrumptious, we'll set something back where it's 100 wins. If it's anybody else, this will just give us some interesting data to play around with. Now, get score response. This is one thing I don't like about Spring and Java. They require you to spell things correctly, which I find is very limiting. Request payload, that looks good. What is the error? Oh, we have to return a get score response. I got the score. Well, let's get that score response. So there is a class called get score response. That's what we're supposed to be returning here. Equals new get score response. This is one of the classes that was created for us. And this has a method to set the score, right? And what are we going to set it to? Well, this score here that's got populated one way or another. And then we'll just return the response, right? That's the whole idea of this method here. Now, does that look good? Does that look handsome? It looks good. It looks handsome. It just doesn't look complete. So there's a few things that we've got to add in here. And specifically for this method, we have to indicate that this method is going to be handling an endpoint, specifically the get score request endpoint. So we come over here and right at the top of the class, we say this is a class that is going to handle an endpoint, or maybe more than one endpoint. And this method here, we throw the payload root annotation on here. The namespace that we use is HTTP:, I'm going to copy and paste this because I'm going to spell it incorrectly with my fat fingers, but also it's worthwhile just seeing where that namespace is defined. It's defined here in that schema file. So we come over to our endpoint. Okay, it's associated with that namespace and the local part, not local port, local part. Use, can you use control space there? Oh, I can't. Local part, I guess because I haven't imported my classes yet. And this is going to handle specifically the get score request endpoint. It makes a lot of sense to paste that stuff in there. Okay, now, do you see that red X there? If you see a red X, you need to get your eyes checked because that is a white X on a red background. But I think the problem there is I haven't organized my imports. So right click, source, organize those imports, control, save, name, space. Again, just one of the shortcomings of Spring and Java is that it forces you to spell things correctly all the time. And I really have to do something about that. That just won't, that aggression won't stand. Okay, so it looks good. I'm just going to do a quick look on this. Oh, and I actually do see something that I missed. Whenever you specify the payload route, you also have to specify the fact that we're going to be getting a response payload as well. The client will be getting a response payload. So do not forget that annotation right there. Okay. Things would have totally messed up if I didn't put that in. Okay, we're cooking with gas now though. Okay, the last thing that we need to do is we need to configure a servlet for this environment. You see, when we're working with SOAP-based web services in Spring Boot, we have to configure the environment to use a special servlet that can handle and send out WSDL files to people, make our web services available to them. So we got to add a little configuration class here and configure a servlet to handle web service requests. So I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to call it web service configuration. It is going to have WS configurer adapter. WS configure adapter as a superclass. Browse for superclass. WS configurer adapter. And there it is there. It's going to have that as the superclass and a couple of annotations on here. First of all, it's a configuration component, so we want to put the configuration annotation on there. And also we're going to be enabling web services here, SOAP-based web services. So we need to put the enable web services annotation on that as well. Okay, that starts us off. Now, I will say this is a little bit of boilerplate code here. So I'm not going to type this out line by line. I'm just going to paste this in and talk it out. The first thing we need to do is, do you see that red X there? The first thing we need to do is just configure something called the message dispatcher servlet. It's a simple servlet. It will allow WSDL files to be sent down to the client, and it can act alone without being captured by, I don't know, some web MVC dispatcher servlet or something like that. As you can see, we passed it the application context, so it's part of our Spring container. We also set up the /WS context route that will be part of the URL. So when somebody wants the WSDL file, they say localhost :8080/WS/score.WSDL, and they'll get the WSDL file. And from that WSDL file, they can figure out what they can invoke. Now, there's other parts of the application that might need to know what the XSD schema is. So we're going to add another line here that just basically returns the XSD schema. And you can see all we're doing is we're just returning the score.xsd file, which is in the resources folder, which is in the class path. Nothing special there. And then finally, okay, I'm doing just a very quick interruption here. A couple of things. You know, the YouTube algorithm hates me for some reason right now. If you're enjoying this video, if you could like, subscribe, and even leave a comment, I would really love to hear from you and find out if you've enjoyed this. It'll also help wake up the YouTube algorithm and maybe give my channel and my videos a little bit more exposure. So I would really appreciate that. The other thing too is I got a new copy of Hibernate Made Easy coming out, the best-selling book. I've updated it for version 7 of Hibernate. So if you're into JPA, Spring Data, Spring JDBC, Please sign up for my mailing list. You don't have to buy it, but I'll be raffling off some free copies for members of my newsletter. And I'll also be making chapters available through the newsletter as well. So sign up for that. There's a link in the description. And finally, I helped out with some final edits on Darcy DeClute Scrum Master Certification Guide. So if you're agile and you're working with Scrum and you're interested in getting Scrum Master certified, a lot of people have been using this book to score 100% on the Product Owner and Scrum Master exam. So it's available on Amazon. Go pick that up. I know Darcy would be very happy if you did. Okay, that's it. I'm really sorry to bother you. Let's get back into the coding. And now for the last method here, it is just a method that is going to send back the score.wisdle file to the user. If they say /ws/score.wisdle, it's with that WSDL file that SOAP-based clients can figure out what endpoints they can invoke and what data they need to pass back and forth. Now, I think all of this looks pretty darn handsome. I'm actually going to give this a run. I'm nervous. There's always something that you tend to forget, but I'm going to right-click and say run as a Spring Boot application. Take a look at that console window just a little bit. Nothing major there. No news is good news. WS addressing looks like it's in there. So, okay, interesting. Now, how do you test this? Well, one way you can test it is opening up a web browser and going to localhost 8080 /8080/ws/score.wisdle. And that will return your WSDL file for you. This is not the XSD file. This is different. This is a full WSDL file. If you were to compare the two, you'd see that they're different. Now, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to open up SOAP UI. This is a tool that's brought by SmartBear. There are also people that play a major role in Swagger for helping you test RESTful APIs. So I got a tutorial on how to install Swagger with Spring Boot and simplify your testing. So please give that a look. I'm going to close this window here. I'm going to come over to SOAP. I'm going to give the name Spring SOAP Web Services and paste in that WSDL file. I'm going to click OK after pasting in the WSDL file. And then you'll see over here, it's recognized that there's a get score method. And if I double click on request, it'll generate the XML that I need in order to send a request. Now, one of the users that we've got registered is Scrumptious. So I'll type in Scrumptious there. I'll click the beautiful green button and we'll take a look at what comes back to us. And it says Scrumptious has 100 wins, 0 losses, and 0 ties. Now, what happens if I put @Cameron McKenzie on there? By the way, that's my Twitter handle. So if you're on Twitter, follow me and say hello over there. Don't forget to like and subscribe and sign up for my newsletter as well. But if we click play and look at the raw XML, there we go. 99, 66, and 7. The 3 best hockey players of all time. Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, who's the greatest, and then number 7, Tim Hortons right there. And if we map back to our code, you can see that that just maps back to the score endpoint where we said if Scrumptious comes in, give Scrumptious 100 points and anybody else 99, 66, and 7. By the way, Scrumptious, that's Darcy DeClute. You can see your Scrum Master certification guide behind me. If you're interested in getting Scrum Master certified, it helped me pass the Scrum Master 1 and Scrum Master 2 exams. But there you go. I think that's about it. Just quickly looking at these files. There's the web service configuration file. That looks fairly handsome. That's the whole thing on the screen. The score endpoint, fairly straightforward. Namespace and get score requests or references to things in the score XSD. There is the POM file that we used, a couple of things that were added in there. The dependency for WSDL for J, Spring Boot framework, Spring Boot's web services, but most importantly, this Code House plugin. And of course, there is the score service, the score XSD that we started off with. Were there any other files there that were important? Score, endpoint, and then I guess the score application. But there you go. That is how easy it is to create a SOAP-based web service. Now, if you're interested in digging deeper, let me suggest, please go check out my tutorial on dependency injection in Spring, because people are lying to you about what dependency injection is all about. And I'd really ask you to watch that video so that you can straighten out that concept in your mind. And then, of course, I do have a number of other tutorials on Spring Data, Spring JDBC, and even creating RESTful APIs with Spring Boot. So please go check them out.